What we're doing here with our DVD production is to record part of the story related to the First World War. The most important part of all of this is to talk about the story of the 61 men, for instance, who had gone to the First World War and their experience in the very hardships. But what they'd gone from is a rural town, a country town, a town where everybody knew everybody else, and it was just so then they were so isolated in their different places where they actually had to operate in trenches. They saw incredible cruelty and the deaths of many of their mates. So what we want to achieve with all of this is to leave a legacy of the history of the Keilor region again, specifically related to the Anzac memory.
In Australia, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 was greeted with considerable enthusiasm, just as there had been a show of support for the Empire in the previously escalating conflict between the British Empire and the Boer republics of Southern Africa, that is, the Boer War of 1899 to 1902. In the governments of the self-governing British colonies of Canada, New Zealand, Cape Colony and the 6 Australian colonies all offered men to participate in that conflict. The Australian contingent numbered over 16,000 people. Even before Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914, the nation pledged its same support alongside other states of the British Empire and almost immediately began preparations to send forces overseas to participate in the conflict. The first World War I campaign that Australians were involved in was in German New Guinea after a hastily raised force known as the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force was dispatched from Australia to seize German possessions in the Pacific in September 1914. At the same time, another expeditionary force, initially consisting of 20,000 men and known as the 1st Australian Imperial Force, AIF, was raised for service overseas. The AIF departed Australia in November 1914 and after several delays due to the presence of German naval vessels in the Indian Ocean, arrived in Egypt where they were initially used to defend the Suez Canal. In early 1915, however, it was decided to carry out an amphibious landing on the Gallipoli Peninsula with the goal of opening up a second front and securing the passage of the Dardanelles. The Australians and New Zealanders grouped together as the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, Anzac, went ashore on the 25th of April 1915, and for the next 8 months the Anzacs, alongside their British, French and other allies, fought a costly and ultimately unsuccessful campaign against the Turks. I had 3 uncles in that area.
The Commonwealth Government pledged Australia's wholehearted support to Great Britain. In the words of the opposition leader Andrew Fisher, who became Prime Minister 1 month after the war started, Australians will stand beside our own to help and defend her, the mother country, and to our last man and our last shilling. Most Australians greeted the news with great enthusiasm, and the volunteers rushed to enlist an exciting war which was expected to be over by Christmas. Thousands of men swamped the recruiting offices on the day they opened. Some sought combat. Others escaped from normal life. Some needed regular pay, while others would have enlisted just for nothing. In response to the overwhelming number of volunteers, the authorities set exacting physical standards for the recruits.
I'm a descendant of David and Susan Milburn, the first, one of the first residents of Keilor, and my memories of their son Alf was that he was a very mechanical minded man. I think in his younger days he was very much into motorcycles, hill climbing and that sort of stuff on motorbikes. Milburn's had a big steam engine at the time for pumping water. That was one of his main things, working on the steam engine. Yeah, very much into mechanical things. After the Second World War, he introduced a reversible disc plough that was converted from a horse-drawn plough, converted to be drawn behind a tractor. And it was his ingenuity, I think, that got this all together, and also he pioneered the introduction of tractors into Keilor. Well, with there is a letter that he had written from France in, I think, 1916 to his father, 10 pages, outlining a lot of the activities that they were involved in over in France. And he was a runner, sending out messages to and delivering and sending out messages to the front line. And this is how he was recommended by his peers for honour, and that's, I believe, how the medal came about.
I don't know whether I should say this, but during his time he was court-martialed, so he used to like to tell me that and bring out the necessary paperwork. But when my aunt gave me all the medals and the paperwork she had, because when he did this, she used to go really off that he should have been ashamed of himself. He told me it was for selling dirty petrol to the Yanks. And somehow, I think after he died, that court-martial must have disappeared. I think she destroyed it. Yeah. So he talked more about that than he did about the medal, really. Okay. Yeah.
The United Kingdom declared war on Germany the next day, and on 8th of August, the Australian government received a reply requesting that the transfer be made immediately, if not already done. 2 days later, on 10th of August, the Governor-General officially transferred control of the Royal Australian Navy to the British Admiralty, which would retain control until August the 19th, 1919.
Tom enlisted from Keilor into the Australian Infantry Force in 1916, and he left on the Orsova for overseas on the 1st of August. In one of his early letters, he writes about the food on the ship, and the breakfasts were either a chop, a piece of steak, or a sausage with porridge as well. And for dinner, he said they had roast beef, potatoes, cabbage, and plum pudding for dessert. And quoting him, he says, "So we don't do too bad, do we? I don't know that I'd like that diet for 3 weeks." Tom saw his first snow in France, and one Sunday, they'd had lots of snow, but they had to march 5 miles to church through the snow. Only the day before, they had marched exactly the same distance to have a bath. It was the first time they'd had a bath in a month. And in his letter he says, "So you can guess the colour I was." In another letter he writes about being in the trenches and how bad the rats were. But the rats were so bad that they were eating holes in their boots and their